afternoon yet? Is it afternoon?
I think so.
It's afternoon, yes. Good afternoon. We're here today to discuss the not minor topic of increasing the GDP of the internet. And Claire's basically going to explain to it how to do that. Claire, what are we talking about here? When we're talking about increasing the GDP, what are we actually talking about, and what's the current problem?
Yeah, I think that one of the most surprising statistics that I think about is that less than 5% of consumer spending is online. And if you think about how rich technology is in all of our lives and how important the internet and mobile has become and how we conduct ourselves, that's the problem. Like, it really should be much higher. And I think some of the barriers to creating a business around the world are what has been one of the problems. And so Stripe is really about building the platform, the infrastructure for any entrepreneur, wherever they are, to have like an agile platform that enables to build an online business and iterate and internationalize it as quickly as they need to achieve their vision.
And if you could identify why it is that it's only 5% of the commerce is transacted on it, what are we talking about?
I think one of the key root causes, and it's actually happened in advertising in a lot of ways, is that a lot of people just took desktop. So they said, okay, we figured out this desktop internet thing and how commerce works on a desktop machine, and then tried to translate that to mobile devices. And if you look at places in the world like Asia, which are very mobile first, almost 50% of e-commerce in Asia is via mobile device. But in the US, that's something like roughly 10%. And I think it's because on a mobile interaction as a consumer, you don't want to follow links, you don't want to be filling out forms, you need an entirely native experience to conduct commerce. And the entrepreneurs who are going to be successful are going to be the ones that build from mobile initially, instead of inventing something that was already working on the desktop. It won't work on mobile.
So why are we taking so long to move from that desktop commerce model to a mobile one?
I think from a payments perspective, it's really that we haven't, and this is where Stripe, I think, comes in, brought technology to bear. If you think about what cloud and cloud storage has done for the ability to get a startup running and get your data operating as quickly as possible, in many ways, thinking about APIs and a way to sort of flexibly say, hey, you could turn on working with Stripe's APIs, and Kickstarter, for example, went into 18 countries overnight. And in the world before, you would have to have relationships with banks, handle things like PCI compliance, KYC. You need a flexible platform that just, and choose what parts of the API you're going to use for the business model that you're pursuing. And then you need to be able to adapt and iterate that quickly. And I just don't think we had a technology solution before to scaling payment infrastructure. And what we're working to do, we're at the very beginning, and I'm not going to say that we've solved it, is building that platform for entrepreneurs to scale.
So how soon do you think it will be before we reach what could be described as a tipping point?
In some days, I feel like it's happening more slowly, and then you realize what's even happened over the past year in terms of, in particular, we're seeing a lot of traction with marketplace business models, whether that's Deliveroo in the UK that it just launched in Ireland, and as actually we're working with them on plans across Europe, or Lyft in the US, Hitch in France. A lot of these things that you don't even realize is, first of all, the payment is so frictionless, you're just paying with your mobile device. I think that traction is the beginning of the tipping point. But we have many years to come, I think.
And why do you think mobile is so difficult to actually negotiate? Like, what are the barriers there, and how soon do you think it will be till we work those out?
I talked a little bit about sort of inventing from mobile first and really having a native payments experience. I think the other thing that's difficult is consumer behavior. I think we came to expect a certain type of behavior with the internet on a desktop device, and it's really not the same. This is another analogy to advertising. You just can't put a bunch of search links or a bunch of display ads. You have a different screen, a different expectation by the consumer. And so one of the things actually with the product we launched this year called Relay is sort of reinventing in-app mobile commerce such that if you're a merchant and you want to sell across a variety of platforms, social platforms like Twitter or apps like ShopStyle, you can just do one integration with us and be there where the consumer is actually experiencing the good that they might purchase. And I think that's a big shift in thinking about things like retail.
How do you see that social commerce model going at the moment? How do you see that progressing? Is it going as you would expect?
I don't think, look, if I could predict consumer trends, I would probably be in a different job. I would say that it's been fascinating to me to see the engagement levels, the time in certain apps. I think we all know that you could have, on average, I think 47 apps on your phone, but really you tend to use 7 to 11 on a regular basis. And the engagement level in those social apps, I mean, for me, I'm a huge Twitter user. I'm spending a lot of minutes on there. It's a place where I discover a lot of news and information. Is it a place where I'm going to discover a lot of products to purchase? My hypothesis is in some cases, in some categories. But there's much more. I mean, Pinterest is really at the very beginning of their buyable pins. We power the payments for their buyable pins. And I think it remains to be seen how consumers transition from sort of discovery and engagement to purchase.
I think we saw with the actor Jared Leto selling T-shirts on Twitter.
He did very well.
Using Stripe technology.
He did very well, and it's hard to recognize him with his different hair
and
colors.
Tiesto as well, the Dutch dance.
Yeah, and also a lot of sports teams have done very well. You can think about, Twitter's very event-driven, so you think about like events happening in real time and things that become memorabilia for that event, or associated with celebrities. Or big brands and iconic things. Warby Parker was one of our launch partners and was just selling these very hip and cool glasses, which I was surprised, but they were kind of iconic looking, and I think people really engaged.
So do you see social commerce then as just one part of?
Definitely, one part of a much broader strategy, and I think it goes back to the point I was making about if you don't build everything that you have on an agile platform, you're not going to be able to experiment and realize the potential of what will be some shifting ways that consumers, I think, engage across mobile and across devices, whether that's in your own app, in social apps, or in the mobile web, frankly. I think one of the pieces of thinking about mobile that Stripe really cares about is how can you just like instantly, in a frictionless way, not have to think about payment as a consumer, but also as the business.
What are you seeing here in Europe among European users of Stripe, and what are the general trends you're seeing here?
I think that it's actually really exciting. First of all, part of this year for Stripe and part of my role is really expanding our presence in Europe. Being there for our users, we've just hired a head of developer relations. Being closer to the developer community in more markets around the world is something that's very important to us. But one thing that we're seeing is a lot of enthusiasm. I think that the environment for new businesses in Europe, the funding is starting to become more available. Talent wants to stay in these markets, and they want to work for these new business models. And I think we hope to be a key partner to enable those new business models through our tools and infrastructure. We're seeing some trends that are like verticals, say fintech in the UK has become very big. Obviously marketplaces, which I already mentioned, whether that's delivery services, transportation marketplaces in France and the UK and many markets. We also have some very big Stripe users that are platforms unto themselves for building online and actually mobile-first businesses, like Ticktail in Sweden or Shopify in Canada. That's a really good trend to see when you think about increasing the GDP of the internet.
Now, you spent 10 years at Google. You were vice president in charge of self-driving cars at Google.
At the end, yeah.
Yeah, before you moved to Stripe.
Yeah.
Why did you go over to Stripe, and what have you seen since?
I think that one thing that was very exciting about being at Google is it's a company that's very attracted to tackling and solving really big problems that could have a pretty massive impact. And certainly self-driving cars is a terrific example of that. And when you think about the sort of pillars of realizing the potential of the web, search was one of those pillars, finding the information. I think some of the social applications we're seeing. Facebook, Twitter is another pillar of that. Frankly, economic infrastructure is that problem that is going to have that impact, and Stripe in many ways embodied that to me, the chance to work on something that ultimately for me is about economic infrastructure, economic access. It's pretty criminal to me that you could start a company in some countries in the world and not be able to sell to consumers in another country. And in the age of the internet, that just seems wrong, and we should be able to build an infrastructure that doesn't make that the case.
And you've partnered with Alipay in China, right?
We have. So if you use Stripe, you can accept Alipay. One of the things we're very important to us is to be on sort of the leading edge of things. We accept Apple Pay. We've actually rolled out Apple Pay in the US, the UK, Australia. So if you are on Stripe as a merchant, you can accept any of those new Bitcoin payment methods because, again, we believe that agility and flexibility as you think about different ways that consumers want to pay. In particular, the Chinese consumer buying from merchants, thinking across borders, we need to have a payment method that they're familiar with and that they want to use.
That commercial balkanization of the internet is something, isn't it? I mean, we were talking before about systems from M-Pesa in Kenya to all sorts of diversified payment systems. How do you think that's going to play out in the next couple of years?
I don't think anybody woke up and said, hey, let's balkanize the internet. I think it was that we were building from some traditional structures. I almost think about like the way that desktops were sort of, you had to hard code and hold all your software client side, right? Payments and payment infrastructure was very local, very client side. And to me, the cloud was this movement of the last 10 years. And the next 10 years are really, I think Stripe represents a trend of these sort of API-driven services that enable you to immediately sort of hopefully rip down those balkanized walls. And frankly, we've had a great year in working with what people might consider traditional players. We work very closely with Visa, American Express, MasterCard. A couple of them have invested in Stripe. It's not like they're interested in preventing cross-border commerce. It's just we have to rebuild some of the underlying infrastructure together to make it happen.
That's a big thing for Stripe, though, isn't it? Because you have entered an area which is traditionally very conservative, very entrenched, a lot of silos, a lot of different systems, a lot of fear as well. How do you find that process, or is that starting to smooth out a little bit?
I think that when I was joining Stripe, I had a lot of those thoughts, like this is an entrenched industry, and actually everyone is very interested in making payments work for everyone on the web, in realizing the new business models that are in people's heads and aren't being realized commercially in some countries in the world. And I think what I've found, if people ask me what surprised me joining Stripe, one of them is the depth and speed at which we've been able to have banking partners and relationships around the world. But what they haven't brought to the table, because it wasn't in the way they built as a company, was the technology DNA, solving the problem from an entirely different angle. And I think that's where that partnership is really powerful, and that's why I think we've made the progress we've made. There's a ways to go, and there are different markets that have sort of different ecosystems that we have to work through, but it's been much less about who's blocking who and more about how do we work together to realize the vision that everyone can articulate that we just haven't realized yet.
Lastly, what general advice would you have for people here who might be interested in building their own e-commerce platform?
Yeah, I think the cheesy way of saying it would probably be don't reinvent the past, but instead invent the future. I think there's a lot of people copying old ideas and models and trying to translate them into mobile.
Could you give me an example there, for example?
Oh, I'm not going to call anyone out, Adrian. But I think I was mentioning it. If you think about the commerce experience, when I go to buy something on my phone, I am not going to fill out my information
with 9 different screens.
In 9 different fields, right? You should just know me. You know me, it's my phone, I unlocked it, right? You have to think about identity differently. You should think about one screen experiences differently. I think that's been a real stumbling block. I think in markets where there wasn't a desktop generation, you don't see the same kind of commerce hurdles. But in terms of inventing the future, you can think about problems in entirely new ways, and I think that's where the next businesses are going to come from. So I welcome all of your ideas, and I would welcome them all on Stripe.
Okay. Listen, Claire Hughes Johnson, thank you very much, Chief Operating Officer of Stripe.
Adrian.
Thanks.